welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about reptiles and amphibians, and I am one of your four co-hosts. My name is Dr. Mark D. Schertz. I'm the curator of herpetology at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, and I am joined today by the wonderful team. Go ahead, Hiral.
Hi everyone, Hiral here, snake ecologist from South Africa.
Wonderful. And Gabriel?
And I'm Gabriel Ghetto, and I'm a scientific illustrator, paleo artist, and concept artist. And I used to work in herpetologies, but I'm anymore.
And Ethan?
I'm a cartoonist and herpetoculturist hobbyist, and I never worked in herpetology, and I don't anymore.
Great. Wonderful. Hello. Welcome back. This is episode 24 of the show. At least that part I can get now. You aren't going to get cross-references, but you are going to get the individual reference numbers. We're keeping on track of it. Hey, welcome back. Everything is happening in the world. The spring is coming in this part of the world, at least. Hiral was just saying that it is how many degrees?
39.
39 degrees in South Africa.
Super hot.
So the situation is there a little different than the 5 degrees that it is currently in Copenhagen. But the year is getting better and the days are getting longer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And so everything is looking up.
It's 39F here where I am. So.
F. Oh. Don't use those. Don't use those. Nobody knows how to read.
I'm American.
I
can't help it. All right, I'm American.
I don't know what an F is. Anyway, so this episode we are going to be talking about all manner of really cool things, some snaky things. In fact, it's largely a snake-focused episode. But you guys, breaking news! We have some very exciting breaking news. Update your Starbucks order. Who needs almond milk when you can get caecilian milk? Excuse me! ! Interrobang. Hot off the press. This came out yesterday. It's a paper by Pedro Milo Fontana. I am probably butchering that. I don't speak any Spanish at all.
I don't think it's Spanish,
for that matter.
I think it's Portuguese. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't speak either of those, and therefore I apologize for butchering
the
pronunciation.
You have to put the lisp in. That's all.
The problem is how do you deal with the vowel sounds that are different? Anyway, that's not this podcast. That's Linthusiasm. Go listen to Linthusiasm for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so a paper came out in Science yesterday. The title: Milk Provisioning in Oviparous Caecilian Amphibians.
What a missed opportunity to call it Cloaca Cola.
Oh, that doesn't sound good at all.
Okay,
No.
I have some problems with the paper, but we're gonna get into it.
Really? Let me just say first and foremost that also the paper had a I guess like a perspective kind of note site by Marvali Wake, which like the
Everyone's
person that knows the
favorite
most
Sicilian
about exactly. Nobody knows more about Sicilians. So
Yes, that is
it's
true.
awesome that it got that. I mean, it's
Fantastic.
very interesting, regardless of the problem that you might have with the paper.
I don't have a problem with the paper. I have a problem with terminology, but that's, I personally take issue with using the word milk to refer to what happens to almonds and oats and...
So
okay,
you agree with me.
I don't really like the idea that we do this with Starbucks orders. I take less issue with it when we're dealing with provisioning systems because milk is not really a chemical composition, it's a function, right?
Exactly.
But when you go and look up the dictionary definition of milk, it does usually say, even in biological dictionaries, secretion produced by the mammary gland of mammals. So, is it milk unless it contains lactose? That's kind of my question, right? Is it? Anyway, that doesn't matter. This is nitpicking
I
at the highest
think
niveau.
the interesting thing is the high amount of lipidic.
Yes.
That's amazing. So
Highly fatty. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that to me makes it milk.
I mean, okay.
We knew. So what's new about this paper? Because this actually confused me a little bit, and I misunderstood. But we've always known that this species of caecilian feeds its offspring with skin from secretions on the skin, right?
Yeah,
this same one, and
it's
even this same species. It's Siphonops annulatus.
Yes. Yeah. So the news here, of course, so they had that remarkable and slightly haunting, ecology and nutrition of the juveniles. And what this team have now observed is that not only did they do that, but they also produce a secretion that is emitted from the cloaca, now even more all-purpose than we knew it to be before. That the cloaca secretes this substance that the juveniles gather around to lap up, which is
there are some hypertrophic glands in the cloaca.
So it's actually not coming from the cloaca itself. It's coming from hypertrophic glands within the oviduct, which... So the thing is, we knew that there are amphibians that produce milk. But as they say in the paper, and as Marvelly points out in her excellent perspective, the ones that do produce milk, they produce it for live-born young that are still within the oviduct. So it is provisioning for a viviparous organism on the inside of the organism, kind of taking the role of what in mammals is served by the placenta. That is because we only do the milk thing after the placenta has been, gotten rid of. But in this case, the weird and crazy thing is that these are laying eggs. These are oviparous. So they are laying eggs, which are then hatching, and then they have this extended period of provisioning, which we already knew to contain. Yeah.
Which is crazy to me. 2 months is a long time. And they also ask for it, which is the other thing that is super crazy.
So they are also vocalizing in order to beg, basically, just as an infant does among mammals or a bird juvenile does. They beg for it, they make sounds, and then the sounds trigger the release by the female. So this is bonkers. I mean, I still take issue a little bit with, I feel like it would be better if we had some finer terminology than just calling all of this stuff milk, because we do it in spiders as well. That's also considered to be milk. But again, what is a milk really? And if we go at the fundamental level, and they don't really touch on this in the paper, but I guess if you go at the fundamental level of any fluid secretion produced in a dedicated gland in order to provision offspring at any, via an oral route, we could use that as the milk definition. And then suddenly it's not that special a thing for mammals because there are so many different animals that do this. But yeah.
Can you milk a caecilian?
I mean, apparently, if you make the right clicks,
exactly.
Well, they did say that they expressed it, didn't they? Because they needed to get some for the
analysis,
mass spec, whatever mass spec that they did in order to find out the chemical composition, and then they went and did the stuff on the inside as well.
I cannot recall, but is it 2 months the longest period for parental care for an amphibian? Because that's a long time. It's a long time for a mammal. So I can only.
Well, what do you consider because I immediately thought of Suriname toads and the eggs in the back. They're carrying the eggs around in their back for.
But it's different to carry your eggs than to just after your eggs have hatched.
Toads, or,
But I think but I think what Gabriel is saying is that having free moving offspring, post hatch offspring, that's pretty bonkers.
So, the dendrobatids that feed their eggs.
I was just going to say that. Yeah,
I don't know how long that takes because I don't think it's that long. 2 months is a very long.
2 months is a pretty long time to feed it.
Yeah, it's long for mammals. You know what I mean? There are a lot of rodents and stuff like that it does definitely not 2 months.
I mean, I think it's Marvelly who makes a point out of some salamanders produce oviductal milk. So there are salamanders that do this as well, but of course it doesn't go to offspring outside the body. But they do it for their gestation period that is between 2 and 5 years. but again, not outside the body. But gestation for 2 to 5 years is a pretty extended period of gestation.
Yes.
Is it
So that just
Salamandra doing that? Maybe
it probably is Salamandra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that just shows you that amphibians, when it goes to reproductive strategies, and they just have like the most diverse array among vertebrates, among tetrapods at least.
Yeah. So I mean, this is mostly we just wanted to talk about it because, wow, that's hot. That's hot shit. That's really cool. And congratulations to the team on discovering it and then getting it into science and then getting it featured in science. It's really, really, really cool. This, by the way, the first author, same first author as the Cell paper from a couple of years ago, or a Cell Reports paper from a couple of years ago about venomous caecilians, which actually we talked about on the show.
Covered, yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, so apparently when you look at them, the closer you look, the more you're like, wow, these really are kind of nightmare amphibians that are doing all the things.
Well, it's kind of like what we have talked about a lot, right? Where it's like, this is just understudied in general.
Yeah. And especially among caecilians, which are, noticeably secretive, and you cannot, I mean, they're fossorial. You
not the most
barely see them.
charismatic of animals.
I find them super charismatic, but
I do too. But I mean, also like that they're not,
But not just that. The diversity of them is very low. So there are only 222 described species of caecilians.
And just to give a little bit of a background on the species, Siphonops annulatus is a widely, broadly distributed species of caecilian in South America. It goes all the way from Venezuela to Argentina, so basically the whole continent, east of the Andes. And I imagine that means that it's probably a complex of species, because I doubt that the caecilian has such a broad distribution, but a single species. But it will be interesting now to check if this behavior and other behaviors vary among not only other species of caecilians, but other populations of Siphonops annulatus as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just like we have in skinks, for instance, where you've got within one species, some of them are viviparous and some of them are oviparous. I mean, it will depend.
Caecilians
in that case, it depends on elevation, I think, but
not just a whole lot of reproductive strategies, but just a lot of different strategies in general, because you've got terrestrial and you've got fully aquatic caecilians.
Yeah. I mean, caecilians also, there are miniaturized species, there are giant species. You've got a huge amount of what feels like largely relictual diversity to me. I mean, these are the only remaining scaled amphibians, which is also quite a remarkable thing. And then you've got just bizarre distribution that is only really explainable with Gondwana, and then so many species where we have such fragmentary insights at all. Not to mention the taxonomic stuff, which I don't think that we're off by an order of magnitude. So it's not that, we're going to have 2,000 species of caecilians. I'm sure that we're missing dozens, but not hundreds, and certainly not thousands. So I think there's a long way for us to go with the few species that we do have, because again, as you guys have already said, they're just so hard to know, right? So many of them are known from singletons as well.
And they are very, very, very old group, going all the way to the Triassic, and probably even having an origin in the latest Permian. So it's their taxon. Their origins are not completely clear. There has been a lot of debate of where they come from, if they are really closely related to other amphibians like frogs and toads, or are they related to another group of temnospondyls. So it's a super interesting group. People really have to get onto science caecilians because they are awesome.
Absolutely. But we're going to move on from that hot and exciting topic to talk about the main subject of the day, which is snakes. And surprise, surprise. But rather than snake ecology, which we've talked about a little bit in the last episodes, we're going to talk mostly about some taxonomy stuff. Again, all pretty hot stuff. This is all, I think, come out since the last episode was recorded at the very least. So for those who haven't,
it's making the rounds.
Yeah, for those who haven't clocked it yet, we have a roughly 1 month turnover between recording and release, which means that you have a month of, oh, that's old news. But for us right now, in the moment, it's very present. And that also means that we're like there's a month of news to catch up on, which sometimes feels like a lot and sometimes feels like not very much. But in this case, there are two papers that we're going to take as a little bit of a compare and contrast example. Because...
Be nice.
Yes, exactly. So in the interest of full disclosure, there is some active debate about one of these papers. And so we won't go into too much detail. But, right, the two papers, let's talk about them. The first one is about anacondas. You probably heard about this. That a new species of anaconda has been described, named, let's say, from the northern part of the Amazonian basin. And then in a separate paper, there is a taxonomic revision of...
It's not the Amazonian basin, it's the Orinoco basin.
Of the Orinoco basin, sorry, which lies to the north of the Amazon. The second paper is a paper. So that first one is by by Jesus Rivas and colleagues, and is titled "Disentangling the Anacondas: Revealing a New Green Species and Rethinking Yellows."
And let's say that Jesus Rivas has been working with anacondas for years. He knows anacondas pretty well. So let's just say that.
Great. And this was published in MDPI's journal called Diversity, and we'll maybe talk about MDPI later. And then there's this other paper that we're going to be talking about is by Alejandro Arteaga and colleagues, and is entitled Systematic Revision of the Eyelash, Palm-pitvipers, Bothriechis schlegeli, with the description of 5 new species and revalidation of 3, published in Evolutionary Systematics. And so that's a really big taxonomic monograph, taxonomic revision, and we're going to go through kind of both of them and talk about some interesting talking points. So how did you guys hear about these news? Did you hear about the news? I don't know if you guys are tapped into the plug of like what's happening in snake stuff.
So the Anaconda paper was everywhere.
Yes.
I saw people in like Facebook reptile groups sharing it. It's a big one.
It made
because it's anacondas.
Anacondas.
Yeah.
Big snakes, big news. And always, megafauna. Megafauna makes the rounds. That's how the news factory works, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys also see the vipers on?
Oh, definitely. I did, I follow especially neotropical herpetology very closely.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
And that for me, Bothriechis schlegeli is such a charismatic, well-known species that this also was important because the eyelash pit viper is like, everybody knows the eyelash pit viper.
Yeah.
And to have it divided into so many species, which is, well, we're going to talk about that, but I think it was about time.
I had to ask before we started. I didn't realize that Bothrops had gotten a rename, so that's
a long time ago.
Dozens of renames as well because
they have gone back and forward. And
yes, and it's also a waste bin that had all kinds of different things in it.
So are all the, because I know from hobbyist circles that there are like a billion morphs of them, but is it turning out that those are all just different species, or
let's talk about that later.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, Harold, you were also saying that like you're not super tapped into the taxonomic stuff anyway, right? So all of this is I'll be interested to know your perspective on so much of it because, as a taxonomist, I'm always like, are they following the fine rules?
Same for me.
And then it's quite different in terms of like how it then gets parsed. And it's, I would like to say, just in terms of that media coverage, what a shame that the pit viper paper didn't get huge news because seldom will you find a paper that is more beautifully illustrated by photographs than one of these. You can see
it is very detailed. I think
very
that's
detailed paper.
This is the kind of paper that I like, the kind of paper that I used to do, and this is the kind of paper that I really enjoy. The big descriptions, big diagnosis, a lot of illustrations and just showing. You took the time to make the paper.
The photography is done by these people are the ones involved in the tropical herping group, and they
I have a problem with.
They have a standardized way of taking their pictures, and I think we've talked about this on the show before, but we'll get into it more later. How they take the pictures of their animals is a bit weird. So let's talk about the anacondas. Okay, let's talk about the anaconda in the room. So the first thing I would like to say is that everyone, if you're interested, you should go to the ResearchGate discussion on the paper, which will be linked in the show notes. And there you'll see input from several other people other than just us about some comments and conclusions. Because as a taxonomic paper, the Anaconda paper is very unusual. Specifically, when I opened this, because I saw the news, new Anaconda species. Wow, wicked, let's go look. So I opened this article up, and I was like, where's the species description? Where's the holotype designation? Where's the diagnosis? Where's the description? Where's the etymology? And so what's happened is that they've diffused that across the entire paper. So they've made like a paper about like genetics and morphology, and then throughout it, they're just like, we named this population as a new species. And then they move on, and then they say, we designate this individual as a holotype, and then they move on, and then they're at some point they're talking about the diagnosis. So from the very strict rules perspective, there are certain things you have to fulfill, and so if you're looking for the pieces that fulfill the rules, so that you can be like, they're good. In a normal taxonomic paper, that's very easy to read out because all you do is you go, all right, have they designated individuals as types? Have they coined a new name and made it clear that they're coining a new name?
Well,
have they registered it in the international reference database?
Yeah, and part of when you go and review one of these species is that you have to go through all the literature and see all the names that have been named about that species and make sure that your species... But that's the hard work.
Those are not requirements of the code. I'm looking for the very basic things that are required by the code in order to count this description as valid in the first place. Because a lot of people are publishing papers that don't satisfy the basic criteria, and then it's very easy because you can be like, it doesn't satisfy the criteria, we can ignore this paper.
Yeah, and to read this paper, to find each one, you have to read the whole thing and try to figure out. Yeah, and they basically said that the species is not diagnosable; it's just diagnosable through DNA. Which
and
I start having.
They said it's only diagnosable through DNA, and then they didn't say how. So, okay, so the technical requirement from the code is that the species must be a diagnosis must be given in words, whatever that means, that purports to distinguish the species from all other described species. And to my mind, saying it can only be recognized with DNA is not a diagnosis because you haven't specified how. Like, what are the characters? Because I could say, it's grayer than other species.
It's DNA, Mark.
In fact, you could say it's got different colors than other species. That's essentially what they've said. It's got different colors than other species. Okay? That doesn't purport to differentiate it because you haven't said what distinguishes it specifically. And so, to my mind, this is a borderline case on whether the name is available at all. And without giving anything away, I think I can give the small insight that will come as zero surprise to anyone that there is at least one and probably multiple replies on the way. Because it's okay. So this is a bit problematic. So as I said, there are certain requirements, and maybe it's better for us to talk about what they did do in the paper. So they used a couple of mitochondrial genes, in fact, specifically 3 mitochondrial genes, and they sequenced them from a bunch of specimens across the distribution of the species. They then examined, I believe, 7 anacondas themselves and mined the literature for other morphological data from other papers, and then they wrote this paper that looked at the biogeography. And so what they found in the mitochondrial... they also, by the way, they sequenced, 6 nuclear markers. And then they give, and I quote from the paper, nuclear data from 6 markers did not provide sufficient numbers of variable sites within the Eunectes genus to distinguish lineages and were not included in phylogenetic analyses. Which is to say, we found that, in fact, you can't use nuclear DNA in order to distinguish the species, which is highly suspect.
Which is problematic, to say the least.
That's problematic. And not just any genes. They use the genes that are most commonly used for like species comparison things. What this does flag is that, and they do mention this in the paper, you can't use those genes to distinguish any Eunectes species. There's like one mutation between the yellows and the greens. And I would say, anatomically, ecologically, biogeographically, clearly a distinction at least between yellow and green anacondas.
Well, it's not just color, it's also size. Yellows are way smaller. Yeah.
There's no question. Yeah. I think there's no question that yellows and greens are different species. Sure. But then that the nuclear DNA does not give you even reliable information at that level does come as some surprise. So they are basically arguing that because the overall mutation rate in those genes is apparently very low, they can just disregard it. Whereas, in my opinion, the best thing to do then would be to go and do some RAD-seq and actually see how much gene flow is going on. Because they do say in the paper, and they cite some other people, that says, oh, and by the way, these do hybridize in captivity, and the hybrids are probably fertile.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I think that's pretty well known, right?
Yeah, sure. I didn't know it personally, but it may be known among the people who know these things. And so the entirety of the paper is really based on mitochondrial lineages. And when you look at the tree of mitochondrial lineages, and this may be, let's assume that the tree is all correct and everything. I have faith in their ability to do all of those things. And when you look at that, you can see that there is a deeper divide. So there's a fairly deep divide within the green lineage, and very little structure at all within the yellow lineage. Now, we should say there are multiple species that are currently recognized within the yellow lineage. And one of the things that they argue in this paper is that those should be collapsed because mitochondrially, they are practically identical to one another. Now,
so they're both lumping and splitting in this paper. They're both
lumping and splitting at the same time, which is a bit of a move, but that's what they say in the title even. The title says rethinking the yellows, splitting the greens and rethinking the yellows, right? And anyway, so I think the primary reason that this paper has received so much criticism among people who work on snake taxonomy is that the basic rules of the code are either disregarded intentionally or, in some cases, almost certainly simply unknown to the authors. So one of the cases that I find particularly egregious is that they designate a lectotype for Eunectes murinus, which is the senior synonym of the whole group, the green anaconda, right? But they designate a lectotype that was collected in 2011. The term lectotype refers to a specimen from the original collection of syntypes that has been designated as the new name-bearing type. You cannot use a recently collected specimen as a lectotype. It's the wrong term. The correct term would be a neotype. But you can't designate a neotype when the holotype of the species still exists. And it does. It's in Stockholm, where the rest of Linnaeus's collection for vertebrates is. And so they've designated a lectotype because they weren't really satisfied with the fact that there is a existing holotype. But lectotype is, first of all, the wrong word, and secondly, that's the wrong procedure, which indicates simply, and I'm sorry to say it, naivety with regard to how the code works and how taxonomy works in general.
Well, it looks to me like the authors I know that the senior author has been working in the ecology of anacondas for a long time, but I don't think any of these authors it seems like at least they were not taxonomists. None of them were real taxonomists.
Some of them have worked with taxonomy before.
Fry is taxonomy.
Brian Fry, for instance.
I was going to say that's
has worked with taxonomy. Is mostly a Venom person, but has worked with taxonomy. So, you know, I feel a little bit like quoting Star Wars. Yeah. Should have known better. But anyway,
I feel like this paper was specifically engineered to annoy you.
Yes, it does
Mark.
feel a little bit that way because I've only harped on one of the points so far. Really, there are other ones, and actually, as you already mentioned, I can't remember, Ethan, if it was you or if it was Gabriel who said, they didn't look into the types of the existing taxa. Gabriel, you said that, right? You can't just dismiss all of the existing names.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that that's the most annoying part. I had to do it when I was looking at Ameiva, which is another big name. You have to go through years of literature and find very obscure, but that's part of what you have to do.
It's part of the work. If you go and read the discussion on ResearchGate, you will see why they chose to do that. And the answer is sadly not defensible, in my opinion. It is that they have a perspective, or at least I will say the lead author has the perspective that the local name, because it has existed for longer, would have priority. We know, as this has worked globally, that is not the case. That's not how vernacular names work. First of all, vernacular names are by definition, or are generally not binomina, so they're not composed of two pieces, which is the basic fundamental component of a taxonomic name in order for it to have been recognized as being part of the Linnaean system. But yes, in general, we don't just use the existing name just because it exists. And as
I think that their heart is in the right place.
Absolutely.
There?
I don't disagree with you, but first you have to make sure that there isn't already an available name, because that's how the principle of priority works. And I would also point out, so the reason that they chose Akaima, right, is the name that they went with, is because that is the local word, I believe it's a Carib word, for these anacondas. But as one of the commenters pointed out on ResearchGate, there are other languages also spoken in that region, and they also have local terms. And who has been there longer is not something that is subject to, that the code is subject to. And this should not be how we choose which names are chosen. Exhibiting a preference for one culture's language over another is actually probably worse than just, I don't know if it's worse than using a colonial name.
Let's say more fraught.
It's still a problem. This is still not good.
I am pro, I guess, I'm not, again, I think that it's maybe a good idea, poorly executed kind of thing, where, I like seeing more of the indigenous names for animals incorporated into...
And for instance, I do that in Madagascar. We use Malagasy names for, I think, probably 70% of the species we describe now. So, we do that very, very actively, but it has to be done correctly. And that means first clarifying
my problem is not with the name. My problem is not with the name. My problem is not with any of that. My problem is with how the species is being, described. I don't even call that a description. No. That's the issue. I think the name is great by all times, but you have to follow certain things to describe a species.
I'll just reiterate that, Gabriel, just to be clear, also in my opinion, I think that the name in itself, lovely name, good reasons to choose that. I don't think necessarily that it's a problem that it's only one of the local available names. Only becomes a problem when you start to say, we choose this name because it has priority over the other names because it's been in use longer. Well, okay, we could use a Sanskrit word for snake if you'd like. That's,
Also, let me just say that biogeographically, this might very well be a valid taxon because biogeographically there is a barrier between the taxa that live in northern Venezuela and the ones that live in the southernmost part of the Amazon state in Venezuela, because those are Amazonian taxa. Mm-hmm. The other taxa are either Guyanan shield taxa or northern Llanos taxa, and so there is biogeographically there's a reason. He names several species of snakes even that follow the same biogeographic pattern. I'm all fine with that, and it might be very much and the anacondas in the Llanos, which are these anacondas, these new species, are larger in general than the ones that you find in the Amazon.
It reminds me a little bit of the paper a while back that I think we talked about with the matamatas, where the Orinoco versus.
Well, that's one of the species that they named to showcase that difference. Because there is a biogeographic pattern that follow many species in the same region.
Right.
I'm all fine with that. The species might very well be valid, but it has to be shown that it is valid.
Right. Yeah, and done in the proper, correct order of events. And if any name is going to come up, there are at least at least four available names under Eunectes murinus, namely Boa saitale, named by Linnaeus himself, Boa aquatica by Vide Neuwied, Eunectes murinus gigas, and Eunectes barburi. And all four of those available names would have to be checked. That means looking at their location. And one of the things that the authors said, well, it actually occurs in two places in the manuscript, and it's a bit confusing. They said that attempts to get tissue samples from the type were unsuccessful. What I think they meant to say is that attempt to get sequences for the sample were unsuccessful. But if they didn't get tissue samples, that would be a curator thing rather than sequences, which would be a molecular thing.
Oh, this is the bit of the paper where it says that you can't get
so they do state in the paper
samples.
You can't get DNA from museum samples, which is not true. That's what my whole group does, and loads of people are doing that all the time. So it's quite a novel thing to claim that you can't do it. But earlier on the paper, they do actually say, attempts to get, as I say, tissue samples were unsuccessful. And it's not clear to me whether...
That was probably just a phrasing...
one of the two things is a phrasing error. The one is a misunderstanding, which would be problematic, but that does seem to be a incorrect impression, which does seem to be the case based on what they've said on ResearchGate. But I'll leave readers to go read about that to see if they see that. The other would be simply an incorrect use of the phrase where they're like, the lack of success of sequencing this. I have every confidence that my team and colleagues would be able to sequence the holotype of Eunectes murinus.
So if you're listening, reach out, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, if we had the resources to do it.
And that would be great because we would be able to, if we sequence that specimen, we probably would be able to narrow down at least where the holotype might have come from.
Yes. But
which is another problem
have to do
because
it another 4 times because there are 4 more available names. Which
that's what it is. That's the whole thing. What it is. That's why these things take time and a lot. It's a pain. Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah. I think we've actually covered basically all the points that I wanted to raise on this. Which it's as I say, there is an ongoing discussion. I think that some of the discussion. I think Ethan, your point, which is that it's coming from a place of good intention, it just seems to have been executed incorrectly or poorly. That is a really important way of reflecting on it. I have seen a couple of different communities calling this science is being too heavily influenced by wokeism, or it's going woke. And it's
that's not what it is.
No. In terms of what they're talking about in terms of wokeism, that is what it is, but maybe that is actually something that we should be
good.
Improving upon and striving for. Yeah, I mean, using local vernacular is a beneficial thing. So
definitely.
So please don't criticize this as being overly woke. That's not the problem with the paper. The problem with the paper is that it's taxonomically highly questionable.
I would hope, and I would hope that anybody listening and watching this is probably not one of the type of people that say stuff like that.
Yes, well...
let's hope that our audience is not like that.
You mean idiots, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Please, yeah. Done. Yeah.
I'll say it.
We want to be pursuing equitable science.
We want more wokeness in our papers, if anything.
Yes.
Brief sidebar. When I was working at the aquarium shop one time, I tried to explain clownfish to somebody, and they called me woke, and I was like, oh, "Okay." Like,
how?
Because they change sex over time. You know,
Jesus
whatever.
Christ!
Yeah. There's a whole debate that we can have at some point about. Ethan looks like he's about to lose a lizard. That cat is like, okay.
She likes to sit. She likes to sit up there and watch my sandfish. Yeah,
and I'm sure she does. Yeah,
delicious. There's a whole enormous discussion going on at the moment about what do we do about people wanting to change taxonomic names
with the birds the birds' common names.
There's a lot of patronymic naming where the person they're named after were giant assholes.
Yes, I have never been in favor of that ever, and I'm less in favor of that now.
Okay, I agree with you, but I don't believe that changing all of the currently published scientific names is the scientific approach.
No. Yeah,
right.
No,
and what some people are arguing, yes, changing common names, change a common name, no problem, do it. I know in birds there's a register, so it's an official common name, which is weird, but...
No, that's what we should do for reptiles and amphibians. Okay. I'm a big believer of that.
But I'm just saying it's different than just changing it. You can't just change it willy-nilly because there's a procedure, right? Whereas in reptiles, we could just be like, we're not going to call it all skink anymore. Fuck all, he was a Nazi.
Which is
Cope is the big one.
Cope is also a big asshole, like catastrophic asshole. Stop calling thing Cope's tree frog.
Right.
It's a different gray tree frog.
Right. Well, that's what I started doing because somebody asked me about that on Twitter or something a while back, and I'm like, it's versicolor and the other one.
It's a changing color tree frog. The multicolored tree frog, whatever. Okay. So the point being. Like, there are... I don't know where I was going with this. I was just going to say, like, that is a level of... There are certain levels of change that I think some of us are opposed to taking. And also, I know from the ICZN perspective... I said ICZN. I haven't said Z in ages. I always say Z. Anyway, so from the ICZN perspective...
Americanized.
It's the second time I've done that today. Really weird. Something's wrong with my brain.
You've gone woke.
Yeah. So what? From the ICZN's perspective, we don't want to change exist because it would upset the stabilization of names if we were to start to change names willy-nilly. Changing common names, no problem, doesn't affect anything except for like hand guides.
It's like a slippery slope argument sort of thing where it's like, careful now.
But also the problem with changing scientific names is that it creates problems with the literature. That's the whole issue. When you go and search the literature, you're going to have a whole bunch of different...
On the other hand, and moving on,
I was going to say, this is a good segue.
When we split things taxonomically, which happens out of necessity, that also creates problems with the historical literature. And now, as a consequence of this new paper that we're moving on to, the one by Alejandro Arteaga and colleagues, anytime you're talking about this beautiful snake called Bothriechus schlegeli, before this date, you could have been talking about one of 9 separate species of eyelash palm-pitvipers. And friends, because I'm a curator of herpetology at a natural history museum, I've got some goodies to show. So I went into the collection and I found the box that's labeled Bothriechis legally, and I pulled them out. And now we're going to go through and do some work because we're going to tell what they are.
So from a hobbyist side, I would say it's probably the most popular venomous snake to keep in captivity.
Is it?
It's up there because it's
beautiful.
Well, Heterodon is undoubtedly the most popular.
All right. We covered that before.
No, but I would say I'm curious because I would say that Atheris are on people's the top of people's desirable snake list, not very accessible. But
these are more accessible. Yeah,
the hairy pit vipers from South Africa, from East and Southeastern Africa, are very high on people's desirable list and are often on beginner's hot list because they are not super.
This one is always on the beginner hot list though because it's it's medically significant, but it's not. You could survive it.
And it's also a stunning snake.
And it's a beautiful snake, and there's a million...
and it can come in every color you want.
Yeah. But apparently...
have you seen Atheris in South Africa, Hiral?
No, we don't get them. No.
You don't get them?
Bummer. Do you have any? Are there any tree vipers in South Africa?
No. They're a forest special specialist. They prefer the tropical,
Mm-hmm. So you don't get them all the way up in the northeast. I always feel like in the northeast of South Africa, you must be getting closer to the rainforest blocks, but I guess it's all still very dry.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Mozambique there's it's still very temperate. It doesn't get tropical enough until you get further north.
Yeah. So The viper distributions, I guess all of the tree niche, we can't say that the tree niche is truly occupied in that area by other venomous snakes because those other venomous snakes are also up in the rainforest, right? So the mambas and boomslang and whatever, there are plenty of those all the way up into Tanzania and Kenya and further north even. So it's just missing. What a shame. Maybe you can smuggle some in. Smuggle in the rainforest first. Vipers.
No.
Yeah. Anywho, so Bothriechis, maybe just a very brief rundown of for those of us who are unfamiliar with what these snakes look like. Gabriel, maybe do you want to volunteer the overall description?
So Bothriechis are arboreal pit vipers. They are pit vipers like rattlesnakes, like jararakas and all those snakes in the New World. They have and Southeast Asia because they also have some crotalines there, which are this subfamily of vipers that are called pit vipers. They have an additional pit located under the eye that is a thermoreceptive. They can. We all have seen those documentaries where they show them seeing a mouse in
the predator,
in the infrared view as well. Yeah.
So that's what distinguish pit vipers from regular vipers. They are in the same family for some time. They were considered to be a separate family. I would still consider them to be a separate family, but they are currently considered a subfamily of vipers. And Bothriechis have had until now few species. One of them, the most widely distributed, most of them are Central American, except Schlegeli, which used to distribute all the way from Central America to Ecuador. And there was a record for a long time. There's Mark is showing the specimen, which we still don't know where it's coming from. Guayaquil,
I'll tell you more
right?
about it when we get to it.
Okay. So
not as colorful as I would have hoped, but I guess that's because
they lose their color in alcohol.
Preservative. It's preservative. So Schlegeli is notorious because it has, I think, Schlegeli and superciliaris. Both species have horns on the superciliary scales, which make them look like they have eyelashes. And that's one of the reasons why they're so popular. The other reason is they're all the species are beautifully colored. they're either green or blue even, and Schlegeli had morphs.
Orange.
Yes. That's Schlegeli and Superciliaris. Both of them have yellow morphs that are. But now Schlegeli have been divided into how many species is it?
9 in total, including Schlegeli
9
itself.
in total, which includes 6 new names.
5 new names.
5 new names.
And then
the revalidation
3
of the
revalidated names plus the original. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So no shortage of new of now to be recognized names among.
Well, let's just talk first that the paper has very extensive descriptions and diagnosis of each taxon, which is greatly appreciated. All of them are. The only thing that I think is missing here that I would have liked for them to do is to have. I do miss frontal, lateral, and ventral view of the head of each taxon. That would have been great to see.
Or an illustration of each of those.
That would be helpful. In you talking though.
No. It's super informative. It's super informative because you do use that when you are checking for characters a lot. You want to, because sometimes a description of how a character is measured is not the same as seeing it with your eyes, and that comparison does help a lot.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So I mean, they've done this big distinction between the things. They basically, I mean, the amount of data. I think there's another thing we should highlight here. Compare, right? This work on eunectes. Okay, it's challenging to collect eunectes in the first place, but the work on eunectes, the anacondas, are based on just a handful of specimens. I think 7 specimens that they physically examined. This paper is based on 400 specimens, and I counted. They got those 400 specimens from 37 different museums. That is an insane amount of work. That is, I think, easily a decade of work in order to get around.
You can't take samples from museums. That's impossible.
Well, of course, these are just morphological data. So they didn't do any museomic sequence. Oh, actually, that's not true. I think they did do museomic sequencing because my former office mate, Stephanie Agne, I don't know how her surname is pronounced, my former office mate from Potsdam, shout out to Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. She's on the co-author list. And they did sequence types in order to clarify some information. So that is another beautiful piece of this puzzle. So this is clearly, I mean, this is very high level, high quality taxonomy in general. So 400 specimens from 37 museums. Again, let that sink in. That is so many museums for one or even a handful of people to visit. Of course, the author list is not short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different authors, although that's half the length of some of my papers. Their phylogeny includes 80 tissues. So this is a lot of work, a very, very substantial taxonomic revision, and of course, 9 new taxa. So it's not a short paper either. But the paper is beautiful. So I encourage, it's open access. It's published in Evolutionary Systematics, which is a wonderful journal for anybody who's interested. I have a blog post on my website. If you go to markshirts.com and you're interested in publishing in herpetology, I have a blog post from a couple of, several blog posts ago about the journals where you can publish open access for free for systematics and herpetological work in general. And so you can go and consult that list and find a drop-down or a list of different journals where you could publish yourself for free because you don't have to pay the $3,000 open access fee from PLOS ONE, for instance, or whatever it is from the different journals. So anyway, Evolutionary Systematics is on that list. It's a great journal. I really like them. Yeah, so this is open access. You can go and look at it. And when you do, you will be able to marvel at the beautiful illustrations that are made from these photos. Now, I believe, Gabriel, you and I have waxed lyrical about how much we hate this style of photo in the past. Yes. And it's something that I really would love to talk with Alejandro and the team about because, first of all, I don't understand how you do it. I have worked a lot with snakes and photographing snakes. Haral, you surely as well. Haral, are you looking at the figures? Have you seen the figures from this paper?
I have.
Can you imagine how long you have to spend with every individual in order to get them to adopt the exact same position?
I think there's some.
I've thought about this a lot.
I have some concerns about that.
Are they living specimens?
Yes.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. And they've done this with hundreds of species from Central and South America.
Mostly Ecuador.
Yes, mostly Ecuador, but also elsewhere. And it is remarkable and impressive, but
but also why?
To my mind, raises some concerns about.
I have several problems with it. Aside from the concerns of how the snakes were put into that position, which probably mean that they were. I think there is a concern that I have that they could have been, put in a freezer for a while. I have a problem with that. My other concern is artistic. Or even okay, so a lot of the snakes that they put in certain positions never adopt that position in real life.
Yeah.
You will never see them with that. And I have a problem with that because when Alejandro Arteaga and Jose Vieira and other people were starting to do the Ecuador book, for some species that they didn't have photos, they contacted me to see if I could do an illustration. And they wanted me to do the illustration. And I said, okay, yes, sure. I would love to do illustrations for species that we don't have photos of. I presented this is what I would like to do. And they told me, no, you have to be in this position. My firm thing was like, I'm not going to, and eventually I didn't do that. I said, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do it. And I never, it actually kind of put things weird between both of us. Mm-hmm. So because I don't agree with it if you're going to do a field guide, for me, you always have to show the animal as it mostly is used to, looking nature so you can identify it. If you're going to put it that aside from the concerns that I have how these snakes are being photographed.
Why are they doing that?
It's
a uniformity thing.
Uniform. It allows you to have immediate, direct side-by-side comparison of morphologically identical animals. But it does at some point get to, I don't know if this is the right use of the term uncanny valley, but it does feel a little bit like, can those possibly be real? Because it does very much look like old school textbook illustrations where you would have all these animals illustrated in that way, and those would have been done with dead animals.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So there's an ethical component to this.
I mean, it's. I would be really interested in having a conversation with the people involved that are doing this because I don't know how they do it. I've never seen them do it, and obviously it has a certain impact, and it allows them to sell a lot of merchandise and help them to fund, for instance, the Reptiles of Ecuador field guide and other work that they're doing. So, from a pure photographical standpoint, it's very impressive, very impressive. And they do it with lizards as well. So there's this whole poster of the iguanas of the Galapagos, for instance. They've also got this Galapagos book. And it's so impressive that they are able to take those photos that way. And so
with the lizards, it's less problematic. And my biggest thing is with snakes.
Yeah, I mean, with the snakes, it's really, 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 really hard. Having taken photos of a lot of wild snakes and even getting them to sit in a position where I can photograph them without them looking total crap. Sometimes you're working with them for half an hour. But that's a long, long, long way off of being able
and also
to
they're posing. Sometimes they're posing some of these snakes in ways that they will never. You would never see them adopting that posture in nature. So I don't like it.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is not to diss all of that because, in general, in every other respect, what a beautiful and wonderful piece of work.
The paper is
now, what I would love to do. Shall we talk through some of these specimens? We can talk through. I have, as I say, 7 jars standing in front of me, containing a variety of different sizes and locations.
And Mark's going to drink from each one.
From the Zoological Museum here in Copenhagen. And it'd be great to talk through, because I do have several different species sitting in front of me. And we can talk through some of them. So the ages of the specimen is another thing that's really interesting. So the material that I have, nobody has been working in South America from the Natural History Museum of Denmark, on snakes at least, in a very long time. The most recent wild-caught specimen of the ones sitting in front of me is from 1914.
Wow.
Yes.
That's old.
And there is one that was confiscated, one jar of 2 specimens that was confiscated, that is from 1995. That's the most recent jar that I've got. And most of these are from, I have 1914, 1913, 1848, no, 1948. So that's the most recent one, sorry, 1948. It just looks like the oldest because it's written in the worst handwriting. 1860, and then 1959. And the 1959 one, that's this one here, it is a wild-caught specimen, but it was, I think, sent by a shipping company, so it's not like a proper expedition. But anyway, it has actually quite a bit of nice detail on there. So actually, this is one of the funny specimens, because I'm just reading the label as I've got it, because it doesn't say it on the new label, but what it does say in here is, this is from a banana shipment. So it was received by accident in a Danish port in a banana shipment, as happened with, we have dozens of specimens like that in the
And that's the one that comes from Guayaquil?
And this is one that comes from Guayaquil. So we have 2 specimens from Guayaquil.
Was it one of the yellow ones?
So Guayaquil is, the species is called, it's a new species. It's called Hussaini. Hussaini?
Hussaini, yeah.
Hussaini, sorry.
Hussein, it's from Hussein. It's from Hussein,
yes.
Yeah.
And it is from, I don't actually know what the etymology is of the
It's probably from Hussein Saher, right? They probably named it after Saher.
Probably, but I'm looking it up. Patronym honoring Prince Hussein Aga Khan, who was devoted his life, influence, and wealth to environmental conservation since he was 11 years old. In 2014, he created a Swiss non-profit called Focused on Nature, through which he protects endangered global biodiversity through local organizations worldwide. So they named it after the chap who donated the money, which is
that's another issue that I have.
Not uncommon now in taxonomy because taxonomists are so underfunded. So this is this species from Guayaquil.
That's how you end up. That's how you end up with, like, Boa Verizonus,
or the what was it, Golden Palace monkey?
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
So I have 2 specimens from Guayaquil. The other one is collected in 1860. And I think that the older of the specimens is probably not from a banana shipment. It has some general information on there. You've got the very old label. For those of you looking in the camera view, you can see the old label, which is actually inside the booze, which is fairly unusual. But these are Hussaini. Guayaquil, by the way, is in Ecuador. And then we have a specimen here. This is from 1948. It was collected by E. Mel Poulsen. And it's from a forest. The 2 different labels disagree with one another, but anyway, it's a forest rock field between Cali and Buenaventura in Colombia. And so this species is Torvus, which is one of the resurrected names. I have 2 specimens here that are from Ecuador, which is not very helpful. And so these at the moment are unidentifiable, and I will have to go into their anatomy in order to count the scales. But fortunately, these species are all, I believe, morphologically identifiable, and so I should be able to do that. You can see a beautifully open mouth. If you look at the video feed on YouTube, you'll be able to
can also see the
pit.
pits.
Very nice open mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Nice big pits in front of the face. So that we'll be able to figure out what that is. This is a relatively old specimen. They're 1913 and 1914. And then
that is so cool.
Yeah,
I gotta say.
And then I have one here, which is from Quito, and
also in Ecuador, the capital.
Also in Ecuador, the capital of Ecuador, of course, up in the mountains. And this is a much more blue specimen. Well, there are 2 specimens in here. One is slightly blue and one is brown. The blue specimens would typically in life have been green. Because the first color pigment that is lost is yellow.
Yep.
And so when you put them into the alcohol, they turn blue. And this is the resurrected species Nitidus. So this is, it says Bothrops on there, but now Bothriechis Nitidus from Quito. And with Quito and other capital cities and port cities, you always have to be careful because it might be that you have the material from that location, but that's not actually representative of like where the animal comes from.
It's where it was shipped. Yeah.
And then
it used to happen a lot.
Yeah, can I say too about the green and blue thing? We get that a lot in North America here with the smooth green snakes. When they die, the corpse is always blue. So people will post for IDs and go, "What is this blue snake?" And it's a green snake.
Right.
Yeah, and also I must say that even some green snakes in life can have individuals that are blue. So it's not uncommon to see like parrot snakes, for example, Leptophis.
Yeah.
A lot of them turn blue in some parts.
Perfect. So we are, that gets us through these specimens. So in our collection, which formerly contained one tray called Bothriechis schlegeli, we now have a nice, at least 3 species, but I'm going to go out on a branch and say that I think we probably have 4 here. So it's a nice day for us and a nice, easy thing when biogeographically you can kind of sort things to one species or the other. I found that the distribution map in the paper is a bit odd because they used ecology mapping in order to get it to map, so they used niche mapping based on the locations that the specimens were known from, rather than showing individual points, which is always a bit challenging because it's not necessarily the correct representation
distribution.
So in any case, it's a really interesting paper, and I encourage people to have a look at it. But it's also a nice contrast between what is done, what a very, very nice taxonomic paper can look like against the less than ideal Anaconda paper. So
okay. I have a question.
Okay.
Do you think there wasn't enough time spent doing the Anaconda paper?
Yes. It's very hard to say because we don't know how much time they've been dedicating to it.
If you had to guess, you think that's the main problem?
No, I don't think time is the problem.
Okay.
I think that, if you had spent the time to learn the anatomy in greater detail, it might have been, or not the anatomy, sorry, but the rules of taxonomy in the correct extent, or involved taxonomists, it might have been able to circumvent the problems. But yes, in the sense of having more time would have enabled also for them to look at a larger number of specimens, sequence more of them, although again that's a resources thing rather than a time thing. But more importantly, to look very specifically at the types of the old species, where they are, like getting all of that information, as Gabriel has said, that's a lot of work. That takes a lot of time. So I'm not. I think that time could have helped to do things a little bit more thoroughly, but I think
it's like a due diligence thing, right?
Yeah,
like
but it also would have taken them coming at it from the approach of wanting to give that level of feeling that the current approach was inadequate, which is I think the feedback that they're currently receiving, but not necessarily their perception.
I think that there's an issue here also, is that when you're doing a taxonomic revision of an animal like an anaconda, there's a size issue as well. It's not easy to go through specimens of animals that are very large. We have the same issue with other taxonomic revisions of broadly distributed taxa like iguana. Iguana is a big example. Nobody wants to deal with these huge things. Monitor lizards have the same issue. It's complicated. I had to go through teeth revision, which, an amoeba, which is not nearly as large, but it's still an animal like this size. And it was a nightmare. Just finding the place and dealing with all the specimens, and it's not easy. So it's that's a concern that they probably had. But I would have loved them to look at a lot more specimens. They said that they had data from literature, and that's why they knew that the species is not diagnosable morphologically. But I would counter to that all the morphological data is usually wrong. A lot of time is not detailed enough. So it's just a matter of,
and it's been counted by different
people. And it's been counted by different people, and it's a matter of looking more carefully. That happens in many taxonomic groups. It has happened, I've seen it many, many times. So it's just a matter of, I think what happens is that, to me, and this is going to sound terrible, but I think that a lot of these people that were involved in this paper are not taxonomists. They don't look at, morphology and taxonomy and those important, or even, those important details. And that's why you get a paper like this.
Not that should be like an exclusionary criterion, because you don't become a taxonomist unless you have experience being a taxonomist, right? But there is, so to a large extent, taxonomy is still requiring apprenticeship to some extent, right? And that, I don't know if that's for the best, because in some cases it is basically preventing there from being progress in some regards, or, it also causes us, and herpetology doesn't have this problem nearly as badly as fishes, for instance, where in fishes, a lot of hobbyists just describe species for fun in like hobby magazines. We don't have that problem in herpetology. It's seriously problematic. And so we do expect a certain level higher than I think in some of the other fields in terms of like consistency and quality and whatever.
In a sense, consider yourself lucky that like all these snakes aren't just like B and a number or something, like, because that's what it is in fish, right? It's like
no. I mean, fish
like,
taxonomy
I was thinking
is
like Corydoras, where they're like, it's a C351 or something, and it doesn't have a formal name at all.
Well, no, but that's different than the fish taxonomy, where they really are describing correctly described species by formal standards, just doing it in a totally shit way. So we have that problem less. We do also have a lot of morphs that are being referred to for a very long time that are totally either taxonomically valid but never described, or taxonomically totally invalid but people are harping on about them. That happens a lot, especially with specific color morphs. But
locale. We talked about that before, but locales.
Yeah, exactly. Locales, for instance, but there are other things where they're just like, we'll call them blue version of this animal instead of the green version of this animal, and then that kind of sticks, and then it has actually no bearing whatsoever on populations. They just like to talk about it that way. So in any case, sorry, just to get back to my point that I was saying about what Gabriel was saying, they aren't taxonomists, which doesn't necessarily reflect a bad thing, but it does mean that they are prone to make mistakes when it comes to knowing about the specific requirements of the code or seeing what is the norm. I think that it would be very easy to go and read some taxonomic papers and then be like, oh, that's okay, that's what it actually looks like. That's kind of a normal thing. And you can get that level of training.
But that's what it seems like. I don't think any of these people haven't read a taxonomic paper before. I think what happens is that it almost seems like it was purposely ignored.
I also and reading between the lines, I think that was intentionally done, which is sad.
Do we know what sparked the discovery?
Probably the mitochondrial data, because they were probably
I actually read something about some people trying to do some filming on some documentary, and they came across the species. And that begs the question, did they do all this work haphazardly because they discovered this species through or found something interesting because some big TV
we're promoting our show or something.
Ulterior motives.
Yes. Yeah.
I suppose. Well, I never want to interpret like nefariousness into anything. Not that you're implying that it would be nefarious, but like there
could be financial
clearly this has
motivations
been
here,
a very good thing in terms of publicity. It's gotten a huge amount of press, positive press. I don't know if that will continue to be the case once the responses are published, because, well, in my experience, actually, it's easier for things to get positive press than negative press when it comes to new species, because the synonymization of species does not make the news.
Nobody cares about nerds fighting over the snake names. I mean,
exactly. What they care about is new giant snake.
Yeah, that's nobody's there. No one is ever going to see the fallout.
Yes.
The only time that gets some press is when it's on dinosaurs. And it's like when you get rid of Brontosaurus or something like that.
Yeah. Nanotyrannus has gotten so much press one way or the other. It's like.
Or what was when Triceratops was like
Torosaurus
for a while?
Yeah. Brontosaurus. How much ink has been lost on Brontosaurus?
Yeah.
Anyway, we know that it's currently a lull in the Tetsu podcast, so thanks for being here. We're filling the niche with the banter.
The taxonomic shit talking. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Sorry to be a taxonomic shit talker. It's not ever something that we want to do, but this certainly has made a lot of waves in various different circles, and I think we'll be happy to report back on when responses are inevitably published, how they go down, because it will be an interesting thing. The last thing, and by the way, that I didn't mention, I kind of said, in MDPI, we'll come back to that, and then we hadn't come back to that. Let me come back to it now very briefly. MDPI, for those of you who are not in the know, is a journal house that is based in quote unquote Switzerland. That probably is not actually based in Switzerland. That is more or less universally semi-predatory or fully predatory publishers, with a few very, very rare exceptions. So they don't like to be called predatory publishers, but the way that they make their articles, very similar to some other journals by the frontiers.
Are we gonna have to like flash something on the screen that's like allegedly Minecraft parody?
Well, no, I don't think there's any. There's no secret to it. It's been published on various different lists. The MDPI journals are boycotted by various universities. They refuse to allow people to publish in them. So MDPI Publishing House is seriously problematic because of their publishing practices. Publishing practices do differ to some extent depending on which journal it is. So, for instance, the MDPI journal Genes has a very good reputation. Toxins also has a very good reputation, but some of the other ones are extremely problematic, and in fact, even those ones, I wouldn't publish with them. Their typical publishing model is to do these collections and special issues, which is very similar to the Frontiers journals. And Frontiers journals are also on all of these gray lists, or many of these gray lists, for publications of like not really doing things the way that would be nice. They're very pushy. They demand, or they request and demand people to be associate editors on these special issues, and then when the associate editors aren't being fast enough, they're circumvented and various different things. So there's all kinds of questionable practices with these journals. So for that reason alone, several people have said we should really just be boycotting MDPI journals, period. They also have in spite of all of this, they're all open access and have a publication fee. So you have to pay thousands of Swiss francs in order to have your papers published in MDPI journals, which are then it's a pretty rough place out there. So beware is my final point here, that MDPI journals are papers published there should be taken maybe with a grain of salt, because it might be that the editorial process has not been as thorough as it might be in other journals. On the other hand, editorial practices across even some of the best journals are highly questionable. So, And on that lovely note, I think, unless anybody has any last remarks, we'll probably wrap it up. So, thank you for coming along on this wonderful episode. Gabriel, where can one find you on the internet?
I'm on X or Twitter, and on Instagram, and on Blue Sky as @Serpenillus, like Serpenillus.
SERPENILLUS.
Yes, sir.
Ethan, how about you?
You can find me in the comment section of all of Gabriel's socials, usually as @BlackMudPuppy. In most places. I'm mostly on Blue Sky these days.
Making witty banter.
Making the wittiest banter. And yeah.
Carol, how about you?
So I'm on Instagram. You can find me at Carol's Hive. And then I'm
HIRALSHIVE.
Yes. Well done. And then on X, Twitter, whatever it is these days, and I occasionally use it, and Blue Sky @HeraldNike25.
You can find me at Mark Scherz, MarkScherzz, on all of the things except for Facebook, where I'm at MD Scherz because of my private shame. You can follow the podcast everywhere in the entire internet, where you can find us at SquaMates Pod. I won't spell that out for you. You're here already. Just look at the name of the show. SquaMates Pod. You can listen to us on Spotify now, if that's your preferred place to do that. You're also right here on YouTube if you're seeing the video, so congratulations on being there for that. You can find us on Apple Podcasts as well, and some other ones, I think. You can send us your questions and suggestions for future topics. I really wanted to talk about Acrocordidae today because that was a requested topic from 2 episodes ago, but we didn't have time because we were talking about all these other snakes. So Acrocordidae we'll have to save for another day.
It's going to end up being like, and we have Matt Damon tonight. Oh, sorry, we had to cut
Exactly.
Yes. So we
for all those
to
in
do
the
that.
US, not in the US, that's a reference to a late night show here.
Yeah, I didn't get the reference, but I'm just going to laugh with it anyway. Yes, you can email us your questions, squamatespod@gmail.com. You can follow us on all of the socials, and you can find the website www.squamatespod.com. And as we say on the show,
Hakuna Squamata.
Squamata.